Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Timothy Ott, and I'm here to give you a small introduction to CSS Grid and how it can help you in designing websites today. So, why use CSS Grid over things like Flexbox or other frameworks like Bootstrap? A bunch of the reasons are you can place your content wherever you want on the page. You don't need to use floats. You don't need to use clears. No need to change in the markup order. This includes white space. You can put white space wherever you want on your page. It works with both rows and columns at the same time, unlike Flexbox. That only works either with columns or rows. You can also change the layout of your content. You can move things around however you want, only using CSS media queries. No need to use any kind of JavaScript or anything like that. No outside framework at all. So this is what our HTML looks like. This is just a real simple layout. We have your normal meta stuff and then one div container to wrap the whole thing, and then your content inside. No extra containers to float left or right. We don't need any of that. So to declare the grid, you do the same thing as you do with Flexbox or declaring block. You just to say on your container, you just to say display grid. That's all you need to do. And nothing's going to change when you first do that, unlike Flexbox where it might flex things across. Nothing changes at first. Now, after you've displayed your grid, you're going to want to add columns to your grid. Here I've added 2 columns, both one FR, and FR is a new unit that is only for CSS Grid. Basically what the unit does is it takes one fraction of the space available on the page. So here I've got 2 columns taking 1 fraction of the space, so they're going to take half of the page basically each. And when you do this, this is what you get. Instead of everything being straight in a line, now it's split into 2 columns, and it just goes in order of your content. When it runs out of space, when it runs out of columns, it just goes onto a new row. So next thing a lot of times people want to do, like our title, let's say, you want to span it all the way across the top, right? Well, to do that with grid, what we do is we take our title div and we declare grid column. And then for this, what we're doing with the 1/3 is we're saying we want the title to span from line 1 of the first column to line 3 at the end of the columns. And what this looks like is it pushes it all the way across just like you'd expect here. And I've showed the grid display here. This is in Firefox's DevTools. It shows you the line numbers. So what we've done here is I've started from line 1 on the left, and I told it I wanted to stretch all the way to line 3 on the right. You can do the same thing for rows. It spans multiple rows. It does the same thing. Now we've gone down 2 rows. But you have to know all these numbers. You have to figure out where these lines are and stuff, right? That's kind of annoying. It's not easy to figure out all the time, especially if you start getting bigger grids. So there's a much easier and better way to do this, and it's called, we call grid template areas here. So we have our 2 columns there, and then we've called grid template areas, and how we decide on our areas is basically a little bit like ASCII. You write out each cell, what you want the name of that cell to be. So here I've said I want the first column to have first row to have 2 columns of title, the second row to be the header all the way across. I want my 3rd row to have the sidebar and the content in it. And then I want my 4th row to be the footer all the way across the page. And to put each piece of content where you want it, you go back into your div or your content, and you give it a grid area, and then you tell it where you want it to go. So here I want the title to go where it says title. And when I do that, it does that. And I've gone through and done all the other ones just in that same order. So just like that, just one property, we've said we've made everything the way we want it. So now doing this, using these grid template areas, we can move content around. Here what I've done is I've decided I want the footer to be below the title, and then the header and sidebar and content at the bottom. I'm not changing any HTML whatsoever. I'm only changing what it says in grid template areas. I've left what we've declared inside of our content tags the same. and that's exactly what we get. The footer goes underneath the title, and the header and content get pushed down a row. So I said we could add white space wherever we want, right? The way you do that with the grid template areas is in your grid template areas, what I've done is I've added 2 more columns to our grid. So I have a 50 pixel column on either side of our grid, and in the ASCII, I've put a period at the end and beginning of each column, basically saying I want the first column and the last column, which are both 50 pixels, to be white space. To do that, all you do is put a period where you want it, and that's where it will go. And now we have a 50 pixel wrapper. I know it's not easy to see on the slide, but it's there. Now, if we want to put margins in between the content, it's a lot simpler than trying to figure out exactly how a margin or padding is going to work with all the content without touching the outsides and making it shrink. Grid has a new way of doing this called, you just declare grid gap. And here I've just given it a gap of 10 pixels. What it does is in between each row and in between each column, it will put a 10 pixel gap. And if your content spans multiple columns, it will not gap in between, it will keep it straight across. So this is what we get just by calling grid gap on the container. It puts a 10 pixel line in between. Now the last thing I talked about in the beginning was responsiveness, right? Usually you have to use Bootstrap to move stuff around or different JavaScript. And here I said all you need is a CSS media query. So what I've done here is I've made a media query. I said at media screen, and this is what I want it to look like until the max width of the screen is 736 pixels or more. So I've changed the grid columns a little bit. It's basically for a mobile layout. I just want one column with the content, and I want a 10 pixel wrapper on each side. I've left everything else basically the same, and this is what I get. So this is just changing. This is just CSS media queries moving stuff around like this. No JavaScript, nothing involved. Now, the main thing everybody asks, this is newer technology. Most people either don't know about it or have only heard vaguely about it, right? They haven't really tried it. They don't know if it's on any main big websites or anything like that. And the browser support is actually very good. It is currently at 86% global with all the major browsers fully supporting display grid, the FR unit, and all the grid properties. And then the last slide I have is some resources to learn CSS Grid. Grid by Example is probably one of the best ones. That is Rachel Andrews' website about Grid. It's built with Grid. It shows you all different ways that you can use Grid. And Rachel Andrews is basically the reason we have CSS Grid. She's been lobbying it for the last 2 or 3 years, getting it built into all the different browsers. And then you have your other resources, like CSS Tricks has a complete guide. The MDN has a lot of coverage on it, as well as a little, what I've linked here is a playground to mess around with CSS Grid from them. And W3 Schools also has a CSS Grid guide. And before I finish, what I was going to show you guys is I've done a little bit of a change. I've added one more piece of content, and I've changed margins and stuff, but that's all I've changed here. I haven't changed our HTML at all. And that's what it looks like on a phone when it's at that level, and when it goes here, it puts content and more content right next to the sidebar. Just something simple and easy that you couldn't really do as simply without all the extra HTML you needed in Flexbox or other frameworks. And that is all I've got. Anybody have one short question at all? No? What do you want?
Make sure you repeat the question. About how long, I'm sure you did Flexbox previously, about how long do you think it took before CSS Grid kind of took the place of Flexbox for you in particular?
So he asked how long did it take for CSS Grid to kind of take over me using Flexbox or Bootstrap or different frameworks. And really, once I started learning it, it didn't take too long. But one thing I do want to stress is you don't need to just use Grid. You can use them, within each other. If there's something that makes more sense to use Flexbox, then you could go ahead and use it within your Grid. You can use the grid just as a layout tool. And then once you've placed your content, if you want stuff just right next to each other as a column, you can make that piece of content a flex, et cetera. So, but for the most part, once I picked it up, I haven't really used Flexbox or Bootstrap or any of that since. All right, thank you guys.